In the long history of the Bible, there was a king who was the wisest person in all of Israel. Even philosophers from the east and queens from the south traveled great distances just to see him. He was blessed with wisdom directly from God, wealth that could rival nations, and he ruled over a kingdom more powerful than any before it. That king was Solomon. But strangely, this monarch, who ushered in Israel's golden age, didn't end up with a perfect finish. His story didn't conclude with a heroic death on the battlefield or being taken up in God's glory. Instead, it quietly faded into indifference and a drifting away from God. After his death, his kingdom quickly split apart, and while his descendants inherited the throne, they didn't inherit his glory. Many people reading this might wonder, why did someone chosen and blessed by God end up with such a bad ending? Can't God's blessing preserve a person all the way through? Or does it mean that when we're at our most successful, that's when we're most likely to lose ourselves? If you've ever felt that empty feeling in life, or if you've felt a spiritual thirst after experiencing abundance, then you absolutely need to hear what King Solomon said late in his life. Meaningless. Meaningless. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Today, let's take a look back at the life of this wise king, from the glorious temple to the idols in his heart, from a triumphant beginning to a regrettable end. Let's see what he was thinking before he died, and also consider a big question. What's truly worth chasing after in our lives? Solomon's most brilliant beginning was undoubtedly his prayer asking God for wisdom. When he first became king, he was young, but the pressure was immense. His father was the famous King David, a hero who defeated Goliath, unified Israel, and won countless battles. Now, the son of this great king was taking over, ruling a massive nation. Who wouldn't be nervous? So, in a very special experience, Solomon went to a place called Gibeon to offer sacrifices. He offered 1,000 burnt offerings, which in that era was an incredibly lavish and solemn ceremony. That night, God appeared to him in a dream and said, "What do you want? I can give it to you." Think about that for a second. This was God himself asking, "Whatever you want, I can give." That's way better than any wishing well or genie in a lamp. Most people, if they got that chance, might say, "I want money, a long life, and for all my enemies to suffer." But Solomon didn't do that. He humbly said, "I'm still young, like a child, and I don't know how to be king. Please give me wisdom so I can tell right from wrong and govern your people well." These words moved God's heart, because Solomon didn't ask for a long life or riches for himself, nor did he seek revenge. Instead, he asked for wisdom to lead God's people. God was so pleased with him and said, "Since you asked for wisdom, I will give you unprecedented intelligence and understanding. There has never been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. And I'll give you all the things you didn't ask for: wealth, glory, and a long life, as long as you continue to follow my ways." From that moment on, Solomon was no longer just a rookie king. He was the king of wisdom, empowered by God himself. Soon, his wisdom spread far and wide. The most classic example is when two women came to him, arguing over a baby, both claiming the child was theirs. Solomon had no evidence, no DNA test, and no witnesses. But he said, "Bring the baby here and bring a sword. Cut the child in half, and give each woman half." That sounds terrifying, but it was actually a clever test. Sure enough, the baby's real mother immediately cried out, "No, Your Majesty, please don't harm the child. Give her the baby, just don't hurt him." But the other woman coldly said, "Just cut him in half." Solomon immediately knew, the true mother is the one who couldn't bear for the child to die. This story shocked the entire nation, and everyone said, "Wow, this king truly has God's wisdom." During the first half of Solomon's reign, Israel experienced unprecedented prosperity. Wars ceased, people lived in peace and security, and the nation grew wealthy. Gold and silver became so abundant that they were worthless. 1 Kings 10 verse 27 says that silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem. More importantly, he completed the temple that David had always dreamed of building, but couldn't. It was the spiritual center for the entire nation, God's dwelling place, and a symbol of glory. The day the temple was finished, Solomon held a grand dedication ceremony. He knelt before everyone and prayed, saying, "But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Yet listen to our prayer, O Lord." At that moment, fire came down from heaven, glory filled the temple, and the people fell on their faces, worshiping God. At that time, Israel was arguably the most powerful nation in the entire Middle East, and Solomon himself was the most brilliant king. Foreign monarchs came to pay homage, and even the legendary Queen of Sheba traveled from far away to visit, bringing gold, spices, and jewels. After hearing Solomon's wise words and seeing his palace and administration, she exclaimed, "The report I heard in my own country was true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me." That was Israel's golden age, a rare moment of brilliance in human history. And the starting point for all of it was a young king, praying at night, asking God for wisdom. But behind the brilliance, problems were brewing. Because when people start to enjoy success, that's often when they forget their original purpose. God gave Solomon wisdom, hoping he would lead the people to fear God and live with justice and mercy. But as his wealth, power, and women increased, Solomon's heart slowly began to drift away from the God who had spoken to him in a dream. This turning point also foreshadowed the regrettable direction this wise king would take. Brilliance is always dazzling, but it's also what makes people most easily lose their way. Solomon's wisdom, wealth, and glory once made him appear to be the perfect king in the eyes of the world. But just as the brighter the sun shines, the longer the shadow, the seeds of crisis were actually quietly sown behind his glory. It started with the accumulation of wealth. Solomon collected taxes to build palaces, repair the temple, and construct fortified cities. The national economy grew rapidly, but the burden on the people also became heavier and heavier. His palace was incredibly grand. It said that hundreds of gallons of fine flour and meat were consumed there daily. His throne was made of pure gold, and even the footstool was gold. 1 Kings 10 verse 18-20. The luxury was so extreme that silver was not considered valuable. In short, gold piled up like mountains, and silver was left on the ground unpicked. While these might sound like signs of prosperity, they were also the beginning of pride. Because when a person no longer worries about having something, but instead pursues bigger, more expensive, and most extreme, it's very easy to fall into the trap of obsessing over material things. Next came the expansion of power. To solidify his throne, he conscripted vast amounts of manpower and resources to serve the nation, but behind the name nation was actually the king's desires. Many of the workers who built his temple and palace were conscripted citizens. They performed forced labor and paid heavy taxes, all to fulfill the king's grand vision. Over time, public dissatisfaction began to build. We can imagine Solomon sitting on his golden throne, enjoying music, fine food, and exotic treasures, while ordinary people were in the scorching sun, moving rocks, cutting wood, and building structures. This disparity had already sown the seeds of national division. But the most fatal thing was his compromise. Solomon married many foreign women throughout his life. This wasn't because he was overly romantic, but for political alliances. He allied himself with the Pharaoh of Egypt, marrying Pharaoh's daughter. He intermarried with Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, and others, taking 700 wives and 300 concubines. 1 Kings 11 verse 1-3. Most of these women worshipped foreign gods, and when they came to Israel, they didn't convert to the true God. Instead, they brought their hometown idols and altars with them. Initially, Solomon might have kept his distance, but as he grew older, he began to favor these women, building one foreign temple after another for them in Jerusalem, worshipping Ashtoreth, Chemosh, Molech. These were idols that the Israelites had been strictly forbidden from worshipping, and now they appeared in the holy city. What's most regrettable is that the temple was clearly built as a sacred place for Yahweh, yet Solomon turned around and built temples for pagan gods not far away. This is like someone singing hymns in church on Sunday, then turning around and worshipping a golden calf next door. 1 Kings 11 verse 4 says, "As Solomon grew old, his wives led him astray to other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been." This single sentence reveals the true face of Solomon's later life. His wisdom was still there. His throne was still there. His gold and silver were still there, but his heart was no longer with God. God had appeared to Solomon twice, speaking to him personally and giving him promises and blessings. But Solomon, amidst worldly glory and his love for foreign women, chose compromise and to drift away. In truth, God isn't against freedom. He wants us to hold onto our faith and revere him even in prosperity. But Solomon's choice was bowing to profit, compromising in love, and getting lost in pride. Sometimes people fall not because they are weak, but because they are too strong. Solomon didn't fail in hardship, he was swallowed by success. This is the hidden danger behind glory. The smartest man made the most foolish decisions. The most glorious king turned away from the God who gave him glory. The more he favored foreign women, the further he drifted from God. The more extravagant temples he built, the more he neglected the desolation of his own soul. And God did not remain silent about all of this. He began to warn Solomon. Human patience has its limits, but did you know? God's patience also has a bottom line. King Solomon's praiseworthy glory in the first half of his life was like the dazzling sun at midday. But his loss of control in the latter half was like a sudden thunderstorm, shattering God's initial blueprint of blessing. He wasn't without reminders. God wasn't silent. In fact, Solomon is one of the very few people in the entire Bible who met God face to face twice. The first time was in Gibeon, where God appeared to him and gave him wisdom. The second time was after the temple dedication. God spoke to him again, clearly telling him, "As for you, if you walk before me faithfully as David your father did, and do all I command, and keep my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever." 1 Kings 9 verse 4-5. This wasn't just empty pleasantry, it was God establishing a covenant glory, continuity, protection, all included. But God also added a warning. "But if you turn away from following me and do not keep my commands and decrees I have given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them." 1 Kings 9 verse 6-7. Pretty direct, right? But Solomon didn't listen. Or perhaps he thought, "I'm a king personally blessed by God, so a few mistakes wouldn't matter. I've already built the temple, so God wouldn't really turn his back. I'm so smart. How could anything go wrong?" So, in this self-satisfied state, he continued to expand his palace, built pagan temples on the hills, indulged foreign women in his deep palace, and increased taxes and forced labor among the people. Until one day, God spoke to him for a third time. Not in a dream, nor at an altar, but through a prophet delivering words of judgment. God said, "Since you have not kept my covenant and have not obeyed my decrees, I will tear your kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." 1 Kings 11 verse 11-13. Cite 1. Notice that line, "I will not do it during your lifetime." It sounds like God was showing him mercy, but it was actually a heavy punishment. You have to witness your own glory crumbling, powerless to change it. Then the cracks in the kingdom began to appear, little by little. First, external threats. When Solomon was young, his borders were peaceful, and nations paid tribute. But now enemies popped up one after another. Hostile forces that had been suppressed during King David's time now resurfaced. Hadad, Rezin, Jeroboam. These names began to appear frequently on the stage of history, like a shattered mirror, with fragments reflecting nothing but chaos. Especially Jeroboam, who was originally a highly capable officer under Solomon, in charge of construction labor. But because he saw Solomon straying from God, God called him out through a prophet, tearing the prophet's new cloak into 12 pieces and saying, "God will give 10 tribes to you." 1 Kings 11 verse 30-31. This was practically a public declaration. The kingdom was going to split. When Solomon heard that Jeroboam had been chosen by God, He actually tried to kill him, so Jeroboam had to flee to Egypt for refuge. This image is ironic, the once wise, just, and benevolent king now becoming paranoid, trying to reverse a losing battle with violence. And look at the domestic situation. Public dissatisfaction had been brewing for years. The people had given too much during the building of the temple and palace, the taxes were too heavy, and resentment was widespread, yet no one dared to speak out publicly. Solomon might have thought that as long as he maintained outward peace and continued to preside over grand sacrificial ceremonies, God's glory would still be present. But in reality, God's glory had quietly departed from that temple, which was now defiled by idols. His kingship seemed strong, but it was actually like a sandcastle. Even he himself began to feel an unspeakable emptiness and weariness. So he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. In that book, we don't see a king revered by thousands, but an old man pondering the meaning of life. He repeatedly says, "Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2. He counted wisdom, wealth, power, and pleasure, but in the end, all that remained was a kind of weariness. There's nothing new under the sun. He admitted that he had tried everything in the world, only to find, without God, life is meaningless. This once wisest king finally realized in his old age. The moment he left God, his glory had already begun to collapse. He wasn't struck down immediately by God, nor was he deposed like Saul. Instead, he was left on the throne, alive to see the cracks, worries, enemies, and betrayal, alive to feel the process of glory fading away. This might have been more painful than direct judgment. So, sometimes, God's delayed judgment isn't because he forgot or tolerated it, but to let people see how fragile life is, how empty a kingdom is after leaving him. This is the true portrayal of Solomon's later period. And next, we're going to explore his psychological world in his old age. As he sat on his golden throne, watching the empire he had personally built split at the seams, what was truly on his mind? Did he repent? Did he shed tears? Did he beg God for mercy again? King Solomon's later years were no longer about magnificent palaces or the glory of nations paying tribute. He wasn't the wise king praised by everyone. Instead, he was an old man sitting deep within his palace, contemplating life alone. He began writing the book of Ecclesiastes, a work full of profound thoughts and reflections. In it, we no longer see the king who commanded armies and governed nations. Instead, we see someone at the end of prosperity, a soul adrift, using a pen to repeatedly say, "Meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." Yes, it was him, a man who had everything in the world, yet in his old age he described it all as meaningless. This isn't just an emotion, it's a profound realization. He had seen all the power struggles, the limits of pleasure, the accumulation of wealth, and ultimately discovered, without God, it's all like wind, you can't grasp it, and you can't hold on to it. In Ecclesiastes, he says, "I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired." Doesn't that sound exactly like everything modern people frantically pursue? But then what does he say? "Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind." Chasing after the wind, that phrase is brilliant. Working hard for half a lifetime only to end up like trying to catch air with a net. You can see it, but you can't grab it. He once thought that wisdom might be more valuable than foolishness. But he saw that both the wise and the foolish eventually die, and who remembers them after they're gone? So he said, "The wise man and the fool die alike." See, he didn't just not try, he tried too much until even the flavor faded. But Solomon wasn't just complaining, he gradually found the answer. At the very end of Ecclesiastes, he finally seems to lift his head from the heaviness and says to everyone, "Now all has been heard, here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." Sight 1. This statement is the ultimate summary of his life's wisdom. You could say he regretted it, you could say he had an epiphany, or you could say that after the storm, he finally found the young man who prayed at Gibeon. The book of Ecclesiastes isn't like a king's command to his subjects, it's more like a father's last will and testament to his son carrying the regrets of life, and a deep warning to future generations. Don't wait until you have everything before realizing you've lost the most important thing. Don't wait until old age and emptiness to understand that the meaning of life was never about having, but about returning. Solomon, through the extreme experiences of his life, teaches us an incredibly simple truth. Without God, even the smartest person will get lost. We always assume that a good start will lead to a good ending. But Solomon's life is like a mirror that shatters this taken-for-granted notion. He was a king personally chosen by God, with wisdom, anointing, and blessings. He built the temple for God and led Israel into an unprecedented golden age. He wasn't an ordinary person, nor was he an evil person. His beginning couldn't have been better. Yet, such a man, in his old age, strayed from God, his nation split, his spirit became empty, and his faith dried up. We can't help but ask, why did this happen? Why would someone with such a glorious beginning have such a regrettable ending? The answer isn't complicated, and it's something each of us might experience because people often lose their reverence in success, forget to rely on God in abundance, and lose their way in glory. Solomon's tragedy didn't happen overnight. His deviation began little by little, step by step. First, he married foreign women for alliances, thinking it was harmless. Then, to please them, he built pagan altars, thinking it was just for show. After that, he visited the pagan temples more and more frequently, and slowly, his heart was no longer exclusively devoted to Yahweh. All of this actually stemmed from a change of heart. Solomon's problem wasn't a lack of wisdom or resources, but that his heart was no longer single-minded. 1 Kings 11 says it very directly. As Solomon grew old, his wives led him astray to other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. See, God doesn't demand a flawless person, but a wholehearted person. David also sinned, but he repented, wept, and turned back. Solomon's problem was that he seemed smart but didn't turn back. He seemed to have everything, but his spirit grew emptier and emptier. So, in Solomon's story, we see an extremely important spiritual alarm bell. A spiritual high point doesn't guarantee a spiritual finish line. No matter how much you once loved God or how much you were used by Him, it doesn't mean you're still on the right path now. God cares not about how fervent you once were, but whether you are still faithful now. It's not about how gifted you were in your youth, but whether you are still closely following Him in your old age. It's like running a marathon. The one who starts fastest doesn't necessarily win. The one who keeps running to the end is the victor. The spiritual path is the same. In 2 Timothy 4 verse 7, Paul says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. He didn't say, look how effective I was back then, but rather, I have kept the faith. That's the real victory. Solomon's story reminds us, don't think you're standing firm enough to wander off. Don't think having a temple means you won't stray from God. Don't think because God once used you, He'll definitely bless you now. Spiritual life is a daily choice. Daily reverence for God is the only way not to go astray. Daily examination of your heart is the only way to keep idols from quietly moving in. We might not have Solomon's wealth and power, but we'll face similar temptations. Fame, profit, emotions, desires. If we're not vigilant, even the strongest faith can slowly be corrupted. Even the closest relationship can drift apart due to small compromises. Solomon's life was glorious, yet also heavy. He used his own failure to leave a clear warning for future generations. Don't just envy someone's high starting point. See if they can make it to the end. God's path isn't about running fast, but about being able to reach the finish line. So, dear friend, if you were once fervent but are now lukewarm, God is calling you to turn back. If you think you're doing fine, but your heart no longer truly reveres God, He's also reminding you. Now is still the time to return to Him. Don't be like Solomon. only realizing meaninglessness at the end of his life. Let's start now to follow God closely. Not just starting well, but finishing well. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4 verse 23. This proverb was written by Solomon himself, a teaching from the peak of his wisdom in his youth. Ironically, his deviation from God in his old age was precisely because he didn't guard his heart. He advised others to guard their spirits, yet he himself, amidst prosperity and wealth, slowly relaxed his spiritual watch. This scripture is speaking to us today. Maybe you're in a highlight moment of your faith. Your service is fruitful. Your prayers are fervent. Your life is being used by God. Perhaps you're in a low point in life, confused, weak, lukewarm, unsure if God is still with you. Or maybe you're just living an ordinary day, striving in work, family, and daily life, but your passion for God is no longer what it once was. No matter what state you're in, today's message isn't here to scold you, but to remind and encourage you. Solomon walked the most glorious path and fell into the deepest valley. He was once exalted by God, and he personally destroyed the glory God had given him. But God preserved this story in the Bible, not for us to judge him, but for us to gain wisdom from his story and go further. Because for God, your current state isn't the finish line. He values your direction. He doesn't demand perfection from us, only that we are willing to turn back every day, willing to revere and trust him. You can fail, fall, or get lost, but remember, as long as you're willing to turn back, God is always there waiting for you. Each of us might become Solomon, having experienced grace and also loss. But we can also become Paul, able to say at the last moment of our lives, I have kept the faith. The key isn't how glorious you once were, but whether you are willing to continue walking faithfully now. May we all learn to guard our hearts, not to be arrogant in good times, not to lose heart in adversity, to be vigilant at spiritual high points, and to repent in spiritual low points, not relying on our own strength, but on God's grace, walking step by step to the end. May you and I, in the future, also hear that most beautiful commendation before the Lord. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Matthew 25 verse 21. May we not only start well, but also finish well. May your story not be meaningless, but faithful to the end, more than victorious.